From the end of December to the middle of February, I was shut away conducting a complete revamp of my space. I had 2 rooms piled high with junk from when I had the industrial unit and no idea how to start. The answer, of course, was 1 box at a time. I knew this would mean several weeks of my pet hate, weaving around and tripping over things, but I reckoned it would be worth it. Over 40 boxes of shooting-related stuff went off to new owners, and a further 2 carloads were collected and taken off for sale by another local gun dealer. That brought me to just shy of the halfway point. Now all I needed to do was sort through what was left. I had a rough idea for the new workroom, but knew that it couldn't all be buttoned down in advance. It would all just come down to dozens of what I call micro-decisions, things you can't possibly determine until you're actually in the middle of it all. Much of that came after the hard slog of moving boxes was over. It was once I got to the stage of putting together a simple recording setup that a new challenge reared its head: cables. Not just how to run them round the room, but the sheer expense of buying 6 or 7 different types of leads in various lengths. Then there were the ones which should have worked but didn't, the ones that were the right length on paper but 2 feet short in practice, the leads that had to be powered in order to work over longer distances, and the leads that inexplicably worked with some bits of equipment but not others. The 3 weeks of chasing boxes around was followed by another 2 of grunting and cursing under benches, and then finally, once everything worked, slotting it all into cable management sleeving and pushing it out of the way. I'd have started making this video sooner, but then I got myself a copy of the latest must-have cold virus, and that put my voice out of action.
My name is Katniss Everdeen. I come from District 12.
The delay did have one unexpected benefit. While I was recovering, the new mice arrived. More about them in a minute. I've not got any new music out for now, but I do have a couple of ideas kicking around which I want to explore, and there's also a revamp of an earlier piece in the pipeline. As I said earlier, clearing out the old office and reinventing the back bedroom as an office cum studio took a lot of thought, but once I had the basic layout done, the rest came fairly swiftly. Room noise can be an issue for anyone who isn't recording in a professional studio, so I decided to mitigate this partly by adding an oversized foam head to the mic, and partly by creating some large canvases to deaden the echo a bit and add much needed colour to the walls. It was never my intention to turn into an impromptu Tony Hart, but I've always liked the idea of painting with a palette knife, so I decided to give it a go. That was my first attempt. I'm not mad keen on it, but it's colourful and it fills a bit of blank wall. This one was much more successful, I think. I'm still working on ideas for the wall above my desk. When it comes to drawing, normally my forte is facetious doodles and cartoons on whatever I have in my hand. One thing I have been surprised by, therefore, is having people ask me to do paintings for them. I guess we'll see how it goes. I can occasionally apply myself to something more serious if I really have to. Up until recently I hadn't done much resin casting, so my Etsy shop is a bit empty. But if you want to take a look, it's called Basil & Sock, link below in the description. That said, I am now making stuff again. I don't really know what got me started with the idea of producing clocks, but with my recent diversion into painting, I've started using my paintings as clock faces. I paint directly onto plywood discs and then enclose them in resin. These have been getting a bit more ambitious as I've gone on. This one is based on an earlier design that didn't work out. The trouble was I'd started with one idea but then run into problems and tried to salvage it by taking a different direction entirely. Unfortunately, by the time I was done, this clock would have been 3/4 of an inch thick and weighed a ton. I started again. This time, instead of using plaster of Paris for the figures, I took some of this adhesive called Mod Podge and mixed it with rather a lot of glitter. The result is this nice thin slice. I then did some further painting, sandwiched that between two thin layers of resin, did yet more decoration, and the resulting disc will then be topped off with a final layer of resin before finishing processes and the addition of a mechanism. Okay, the mice. Mice specialise in seemingly pointless activity which I just call mousing. They come in all sorts of markings, and I'd say my favourites are agouti, otherwise known as wild coloured, plain black or black self as they're called, and Siamese seal point, exactly the same markings as a Siamese cat. As you can see, I have all three of these types here and more besides. Mice are naturally scared by things looming over them, just as we might be if King Kong wandered into our garden. They are smart though, and with time and patience they can become very tame. Unfortunately, there was an early hitch with this new batch. Several of them were already picking on one of the youngest in their group when they arrived. There's quite often some tail nipping, chasing and squeaking when new mice first meet each other, and mostly it's alright, but this time blood was drawn. In fact, I thought for a moment that Clementine here may have lost an eye. Luckily I was able to house her in a different cage with these two rather threadbare old ladies. They didn't give her any trouble, so she's been able to heal up and get on with the rest of her 2-year life. As for the perpetrators, given what some of you put poor Clementine through the other day, the idea of a mouse kebab for supper is looking increasingly attractive. And you know exactly where I'll put the stick, don't you? Actually, talking of lifespans, not long back I did have 2 mice that lived for 2 years and 7 months, which is frankly extraordinary. I did start wondering if there might be some sort of Oscar Wilde process going on, but there were no festering portraits in the attic when I last checked. Moving on, work is going to be a little bit more hectic than usual as I'm standing in for a colleague who's on leave. That means it might be a while before any new tunes get posted up. In the meantime, I've been enjoying getting into the new equipment and learning more about what I can do with it. Between the composition software, learning more about mixing and teaching myself some piano, there's been quite some ground to cover, but it's useful and enjoyable. Music making technology has come on a long way since I last delved into MIDI about 20 years ago. This little thing is very strange. It's called a microfreak and is made by the French company Arturia. They have a very good reputation for cleverly thought out, solidly built and reasonably priced instruments. The microfreak has printed circuit boards instead of keys and is almost infinitely tweakable. This can be a bit of a double-edged sword. You can easily spend hours just twiddling dials and shaping sounds, but never actually producing anything. Still, there are worse ways to go. Take this for instance. It's a sound I created by modifying one of the microfreak's presets. It starts off sounding like feeding time at the zoo, but keep your finger on the key and you can hear it's definitely not of this world. Go lower and it sounds like some kind of performance spaceship being tuned up. At one time you couldn't have done any of this without some bulky and very expensive equipment. Traditional analog synthesis is still hugely popular, But for someone like me, having an affordable machine that can do all this is incredible. Well, that about wraps it up for this time. My next video will be about one of my all-time favourite Bond films, its impact on my love of film music, and my time as a young projectionist. Thanks for watching.